we are diving deep into a figure who truly captured the imagination of the early 20th century. Um, a man often called the sleeping prophet.
That's Edgar Cayce.
Yeah.
Yeah. And our source material for this deep dive, well, it comes from excerpts really exploring his life and work. It gives us an incredible window into his experiences.
Right, the abilities he seemed to possess and the fascinating historical context he operated within.
Exactly. We've got material covering his biography, personal accounts, and details about the really wide range of information that flowed through him during his trance states.
Exactly. So our mission today is to take this material and really unpack the most important nuggets. We want to understand who Edgar Cayce was, through this specific lens, how these claimed abilities manifested, some of the surprising things that emerged from his readings, and the various efforts to kind of build something lasting around this work. And importantly, we're sticking only to what our source tells us here.
It's about exploring the story as it's presented in this text, seeing the details of his journey and what the source itself highlights as significant.
So here is the central puzzle our source presents, really. How does someone go from being, well, a simple farm boy in rural Kentucky to providing thousands of detailed readings on, everything from complex medical conditions to lost civilizations and the very nature of the soul, all while seemingly in a trance state? Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
So the account starts us in Christian County, Kentucky, describing Edgar's childhood. The material highlights his deep connection to nature and, maybe most crucially, a profound love for the Bible.
Yeah, it says he wasn't satisfied with just reading it once. He really wanted to devour it, didn't he?
Right, and this early period includes a really pivotal experience. The source recounts a vision of a lady who promised him power to help others, but only if he kept his faith.
And the spiritual foundation, which the source really emphasizes, seems key to how he later kind of grappled with his own abilities.
Yeah. What's truly unusual from this period, according to the text, is his struggle with school lessons, contrasting with this, well, bizarre ability he discovered. He could learn while literally asleep with his school books under his head.
The spelling lesson incident, that's the classic example the source shares. He struggled while awake, fell asleep on the book, and woke up knowing the entire lesson cold. Apparently his father, the squire, was shocked.
Yeah, the material says his father even made a poultice Edgar described from his sleep state, supposedly for shock from the event. Kind of strange.
It is. The material also touches on his childhood friends, noting both visible ones and invisible companions. Later, the woods became his refuge.
Yeah, the source suggests a certain loneliness there, a feeling of being separate, maybe unable to fully access the inner lives of others, even those closest to him.
And he came from a family where some unusual sensitivities weren't entirely foreign.
Right. His father was the squire, his mother a bedrock of faith. And we learn about his grandfather, old Thomas Jefferson Cayce, and great-grandfather William Cayce, who allegedly had abilities, but insisted they were gifts from God and strictly for God's work, never for display or anything like that.
That family context, especially the emphasis on faith and, the purposeful use of any unusual abilities, seems, according to the source, to have really shaped Edgar's own views and his internal struggle later on.
So this period in Kentucky ended with a move to town and a job at a bookstore. And here, a major challenge came up. He mysteriously lost his voice.
Yeah, the account describes this as a prolonged and frustrating period. He was trying different doctors, couldn't hold down jobs that required speech. Must have been incredibly difficult.
Definitely. And this vulnerability led him to Gertrude Evans, who would become his wife. The material describes their relationship beginning during this tough time.
And that feeling of loneliness he experienced earlier was apparently amplified by his deep love for Gertrude. He felt shut out when her mind seemed elsewhere, really yearning for a shared inner world.
Yes, the text paints a picture of his profound desire to marry her, to truly merge their lives and thoughts. He proposed, but marriage was delayed.
Right, because of his job situation and Gertrude's own health struggles. She was reportedly very ill, weighing only 80 pounds, worried about him and their future.
Yeah, and her mother's suggestion, as recounted in the source, was for Edgar to leave and find work better suited to him, believing it would actually help Gertrude recover. Quite a situation.
So this period of voice loss wasn't just a physical problem. The material portrays it as a catalyst, really, forcing him onto this unexpected path that began with meeting Alcee Lane.
Okay, here's where the story takes a truly fascinating turn. His search for a cure for his voice led him to this Alcee Lane, a hypnotist who was experimenting with clairvoyance. He saw it as a new science.
Right. And through Lane's guidance, Edgar entered a trance state. Now, he'd had a previous sort of unrelated trance-like episode as a child, but this was different.
How so?
Well, following a suggestion from a doctor who couldn't hypnotize Edgar conventionally, Lane prompted him to diagnose his own condition while in this state.
And the material states he did just that. While in a trance, he described a circulation issue affecting his throat and suggested a specific treatment.
And when he followed it, his voice returned. The source calls this a miracle, doesn't it? And it was the first powerful validation of this unusual state.
Wow. So Lane, understandably, was intrigued by this success and wanted to experiment further.
Yeah, though Edgar reportedly found the whole idea crazy, he agreed. The source describes a subsequent session where, still in the trance state, Edgar diagnosed Lane's chronic stomach issue.
Giving detailed recommendations for medicines, diet, exercise, the whole thing.
Exactly. And this, according to the text, marked the beginning of using the ability to help others.
Interestingly, Edgar was initially very hesitant to charge money for this, right? He felt it was a gift from God, not his for commercial gain.
That's right. Lane, on the other hand, saw the clear financial potential. It created some tension there, it seems.
So the early process, as described, was pretty consistent.
Yeah. Edgar would recline, enter the trance, and Lane, or whoever was facilitating, would ask the questions. The source notes the questions sometimes had to be quite specific, needing the person's name and location.
And Edgar's voice would change.
Apparently so. Initially described as far away, it would then become distinct and forceful, delivering the diagnosis and treatment.
They must have faced skepticism, though.
Oh, absolutely. The material recounts the story of a Harvard professor who came intending to expose Edgar as a fraud, convinced the subconscious couldn't do this.
And what happened?
Well, he reportedly became increasingly flustered, spilling books, calling Edgar a simpleton, but ultimately left puzzled after witnessing the phenomenon firsthand. Couldn't explain it.
So this period really established the core dynamic. Edgar as the, well, seemingly passive vessel, others guiding the questions, and this sleep mind, providing detailed information that often had unexpected results.
And sometimes validated results, which led to a series of striking cases that began to build his reputation, as the source details.
Let's get into some of those. The anecdotes are really compelling.
Definitely. One case frequently mentioned is the Sloan family child. Severe, unexplained jaw pain. Doctors found nothing.
Right. And a reading was requested by the skeptical Mr. Sloan.
Exactly. And the reading pinpointed an infection behind a specific tooth. Now, the dentist was hesitant, didn't want to pull a seemingly healthy tooth.
But Sloan insisted.
He did. And the source states the infection was found exactly there, behind that tooth, and the pain vanished afterwards.
That's incredibly specific. What else?
Well, another example involved a staff member of Sloan's. She took careful measures to ensure the reading was blind, apparently.
Yeah.
The material says the reading returned accurate personal body facts known only to her. Pretty convincing for Sloan, it seems.
And the Dietrich child, that story sounds quite dramatic.
It is. Diagnosed by a leading Cincinnati doctor with a rare, fatal brain condition, sent home to die. The family sought a reading from Cayce as a last resort.
And the prescription was osteopathy treatment.
Yes. And according to the account, within 3 weeks of starting this treatment, the child completely recovered. The source notes she was a normal teenager when the story was recorded later.
Wow. And then there's the hunt for the oil of smoke.
Ah, yes. An early reading for a boy with stubborn leg sore recommended this specific but unknown preparation. Local druggists had no idea what it was.
So they had to get more readings.
Took 2 more readings to finally get the location, a specific shelf in the back of a specific drugstore in Louisville, where it was eventually found covered in dust.
Incredible. What about Carrie's case? That sounds layered.
It was. An initial reading for her diagnosed a locked bowel, which contradicted the doctors, but it proved correct. Later, she sought a reading for her child's convulsions, and another reading unexpectedly predicted that she herself was pregnant. Again, doctors disagreed.
And the reading was right.
The source says yes, both times.
Even his own family relied on the readings, didn't they? Hugh Lynn's eye injury.
Right. His son, Hugh Lynn, had a serious eye injury from a flash powder explosion, I think. A reading predicted no permanent damage after some tissue removal, which the account says came true.
And Edgar himself, the appendicitis story.
Yeah, that's a key one. He developed appendicitis symptoms. Doctors didn't see a need for surgery. But a reading taken for himself diagnosed a strangular case, basically. The appendix was twisting, and advised immediate surgery within 24 hours.
Which the material credits with saving his life.
Exactly. So these early medical readings, we learn, often recommended approaches like osteopathy, diet, massage.
And sometimes these unusual or hard-to-find preparations, like the oil of smoke.
Right. And this success drew attention, but not all of it was welcome. Dr. Ketchum tried to partner with him.
Leading to newspaper coverage that made Edgar feel exposed.
Yes, like a freak doing tricks. The source really emphasizes his deep discomfort with this. His sole desire, it seems, was just to use the ability for genuine help, not for show.
Okay, so with the medical readings gaining attention, the scope of what the readings explored began to expand dramatically. This is where Arthur Lammers comes in, right?
Exactly. Lammers is a key figure here. Described in our source as a sharp businessman, but also an ardent seeker, really deeply interested in theosophy, ancient religions, the occult, that whole sphere.
And he saw potential beyond just physical ailments.
Far beyond. He actively encouraged Cayce to use the trance state to probe these fundamental spiritual and philosophical questions. Life after death, the soul's journey, why we're here.
He was keen on things like reincarnation, karma, astrology.
Yes, and lost histories like Atlantis and Lemuria, and what the readings refer to as the etheric world. Lammers was convinced Cayce's readings could part the veil, as he saw it, on this ageless wisdom.
He thought the information coming through synthesized different traditions, Hermetic, Pythagorean.
Yeah, Jewish, Christian. Lammers believed it validated his own understanding of the right system. And just to clarify for you listening, these terms, Hermetic, Gnostic, Pythagorean, refer to various philosophical and mystical traditions, some ancient, some more recent, often exploring hidden spiritual knowledge or the nature of reality. Gnosticism, for instance, was a diverse movement in early Christianity, sometimes with complex views on the soul's journey, which the source notes the readings claimed included ideas like reincarnation.
And the source for all this knowledge, according to the readings, the Akashic records.
That's the term used. The material notes Cayce wasn't the first to use it, linking it to figures like Helena Blavatsky of Theosophy and Levi H. Dowling.
And the concept is like a cosmic library holding a record of everything.
Basically, yes. A record of every thought, action, experience. That's the idea in those traditions.
Well, the source highlights here is Edgar's own internal conflict, isn't it?
Hugely. As a deeply devout Christian, he was profoundly uncomfortable with concepts like reincarnation when he actually read the transcripts of his own readings later.
But the readings themselves offered an explanation.
They did, claiming these ideas were part of early Christianity, particularly among groups like the Gnostics, but were later suppressed by church leaders. The reason given was to simplify the faith for wider propagation, to make it easier to spread.
So the readings presented this complex philosophical system, the soul cycling through incarnations, free will versus destiny, karma influencing life patterns.
Right, a system that, according to the source, weaves together these diverse spiritual ideas, all coming through this, humble man in a trance.
And the source really underscores that this was a genuine struggle for Edgar, trying to reconcile this information with his core Christian beliefs.
Absolutely. It wasn't easy for him.
So, with the scope expanding beyond just medical issues, the vision for Edgar Cayce's work grew into these ambitious attempts at creating lasting institutions.
That's right. This phase really began with a move to Virginia Beach. And here, the Association for Research and Enlightenment, the ARE, was incorporated.
Its purpose was psychic research and practical application.
General psychic research and the practical application of the knowledge from the readings, yes. That was the stated goal.
And they found a significant supporter in J.P. Morton, a businessman.
Yes, he provided substantial funding. But, the source points out, this funding was heavily reliant on his stock market success, which, as we know, turned out to be a pretty fragile foundation.
The plan was grand, though. Build a hospital, established Atlantic University.
Hugely ambitious. The vision was to integrate religion, science, philosophy, psychology, to bring every kind of truth together, as the material quotes, all in one place, a laboratory dedicated to improving human life.
And for a time, there was success, but it was short-lived.
Very short-lived, unfortunately. The Great Depression hit, severely impacting Morton's finances.
Which led to the closure of the hospital and the university.
Painfully, yes. Both had to close.
The source notes this recurring pattern of failed partnerships and fundraising efforts too, doesn't it? Ketchum know, the Texas oil venture with David Kahn?
Yeah, attempts to use lecture earnings. What's particularly insightful here, according to the source, is Hugh Lynn Cayce's observation. He noted that the readings themselves stressed the need for accord, like harmony, and shared purpose among the people involved in projects based on the readings.
Ah, so the suggestion is that success wasn't just about the information itself, but the spiritual alignment of the people trying to apply it.
That seems to be the implication, that the human element, the harmony, was crucial.
And Edgar himself reflected on these failures.
He did, as the source recounts, linking them to the lack of wise men capable of bringing these complex elements together, and also this idea that an individual's spiritual clarity, their personal connection, doesn't automatically guarantee success in big group endeavors.
Makes sense.
But despite the collapse of these large-scale dreams, the work didn't just stop, did it?
No. A new association was formed, and the readings continued, maybe on a smaller scale, but the effort persisted after the closure of the hospital and university.
The method Edgar Cayce used for giving readings remained remarkably consistent throughout his life, didn't it?
Yeah, pretty much the same routine. He would recline, relax, enter that unique trance state.
He'd be given the name and location of the person needing the reading. Sometimes they were clear across the country.
Right, and then he'd provide incredibly detailed information, whether it was about their physical condition or, their life history in the life readings.
And a crucial figure in this whole process, highlighted in the material, was Gladys Davis.
His dedicated stenographer, yeah. Recorded thousands upon thousands of these readings. Imagine.
The sheer volume of work is immense. By 1945, over 14,300 readings had been recorded. And during WWII, the demand just soared.
1,385 readings in just 1 year, between June 43 and June 44.
That's what the source says. It put immense strain on him, understandably.
And the readings generally fell into two types, right? Physical readings and life readings.
Correct. Physical readings for the medical diagnoses and treatments, and the life readings which delved into past lives, karma, spiritual lessons, philosophical questions, the more metaphysical stuff.
One significant challenge noted in the material was getting patients to actually follow the recommended treatments.
Yes, because they were often complex, required long-term commitment, or involved these unusual preparations like the oil of smoke we mentioned. It wasn't always easy.
And the source suggests that because adherence was often difficult, fewer dramatic cures were officially documented by the association.
Compared to the individual testimonials that existed, yes. It made systematic tracking harder.
This difficulty extended to attempts at scientific validation too, didn't it?
Absolutely. A reading itself, as quoted in the source, actually suggested the phenomenon couldn't be definitively proven to the world in a way that science demanded.
Why not?
Well, because, in the reading's view, the world had forgotten God and remembered only itself. It stated it could only be proved, really, to that one man who truly lived according to the principles given in the readings.
So, despite the external struggles for proof or big institutional success,
the material highlights that the Daily Mail arriving, filled with requests and updates, that was Edgar's own proof. It showed him that his work, which he described as being built here a little, there a little, stone upon stone, didn't fail on a personal level. It was building a city of healing, not with physical buildings that could crumble.
Up by hearts, as the source describes it.
Exactly, person by person.
Okay, so as we move towards the end of his life, the immense strain of the readings, particularly that surge during WWII, it really took its toll.
It absolutely did. The material describes how in August 1944, Edgar just collapsed from sheer exhaustion.
And in a reading given for himself, which must have been a poignant moment, the instruction was clear.
Very clear and simple. He was to go away and rest until he is well or dead. Stark words.
He went to the mountains with Gertrude, his wife, and seemed to rally for a bit, making plans.
But in September, he suffered a stroke, and he passed away in January 1945.
But the story didn't end there.
No, not at all. The source notes the continuation of the work through the association, the really crucial archiving efforts led by his son, Hugh Lynn.
Making sure those thousands of readings were preserved.
Precisely. And the ongoing efforts by others, like the Bro family mentioned for their literary involvement, to study and make sense of the vast amount of material in the readings.
Throughout this material, Edgar Cayce is consistently presented as, well, a simple, deeply devout man who genuinely wrestled with the nature of his extraordinary abilities.
Yes, the source emphasizes his unwavering commitment to using them for good, constantly trying to reconcile the often esoteric content coming through the readings with his own core Christian faith. It was a constant balancing act for him.
What's striking, as this account shows, is that paradox. A man rooted in traditional faith, delivering information that drew on ancient mystery traditions and concepts like reincarnation.
Absolutely. The source suggests his personal integrity and his genuine desire to help others were the driving forces throughout his very unique journey.
So, what does this deep dive into our source material leave us with? We've explored a life filled with what certainly seem like contradictions.
Definitely. A humble Christian delivering information on reincarnation and ancient mysteries. Powerful, validated medical insights existing right alongside these failed, large-scale organizational efforts.
So what the source truly highlights is the complexity, isn't it? The complexity of the man and the phenomenon itself.
Yeah, it raises significant questions about consciousness, about how healing might occur, about the nature of knowledge and where it originates.
About belief systems.
Belief systems, and about how extraordinary, seemingly spiritual abilities intersect with the very human realities of everyday life, personal struggles, financial challenges, all of that.
This deep dive, based entirely on our source material, gives us a really fascinating look at one of the most documented psychics of the 20th century, seen through the lens of his own time, his personal conflicts, and his enduring beliefs.
It's a story that continues to intrigue and challenge our conventional understanding of what's possible, I think. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Cayce's story, as presented in this text, it really prompts us to consider how different ways of knowing might intersect.
You mean like scientific observation, religious faith, philosophical inquiry?
Exactly. And even apparent intuitive or psychic ability. How they might potentially intersect, or at least be claimed to intersect. And it makes us reflect on what it genuinely takes for individuals or groups to try and integrate these diverse perspectives and make something practical and good come from them. It's not easy.
No, it's not. It leaves us with a thought to mull over, maybe echoing a perspective Edgar Cayce seemed to arrive at later in his life, according to this account.
Which is?
Well, is the pursuit of truth or healing or spiritual understanding primarily about building grand organizations, seeking external scientific proof, launching impressive projects? Or is it, as he seemed to conclude about his own work, something built heart by heart, stone upon stone?
Through personal integrity, sincere effort, and individual connection.
Right. How do we navigate seemingly contradictory information, whether it comes from outside sources or even our own inner experience? And what role does belief and personal integrity play in that whole complex journey?
Something to think about.